This podcast is made possible by Vena.
Hi, this is Dave DeMond. I'm the CFO of the March of Dimes, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 876.
What do we need to look like in 2 or 3 years as we're a $1 billion revenue company? We obviously already had a big $5 billion valuation. And so my thought process was all around what scale and what best in class looks like. It was less about upending big things, but I did need to bring in some talent in certain places that had that public company experience. As private startup experience doesn't necessarily translate always into the skills that you need to be a large public company. And so my job is to sort of carefully bring those in, complementing what we have, but starting to behave more like a large scale public company at some point.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Jim Young, CFO of Coalition. Looking back on their career-building years, few finance leaders ever forget the first time they presented to a board of directors. In fact, many finance leaders tell us that the penetrating stares from the directors seated at the table remain locked in time, forever evergreen. For Jim Young, the stares that remain evergreen were not cast across a boardroom table, but instead a room populated by hundreds of his company employees. Tasked with addressing a gathering involving hundreds of business leaders from across his company, Young's presentation was notable as much for its content as it was for that which followed it. There were questions, and lots of them. According to Young, the presentation offered no new metric or financial insight, really. Instead, Young tells us what the audience found so engaging was how he connected the dots. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We begin after this. Managing multiple spreadsheets, disconnected data, numbers you just can't trust. Your finance team can't be the strategic partner your organization needs right now with obstacles like that getting in your way. Vena can change that. Vena brings people, processes, and systems together in a single collaborative analytical platform so you can drive connected business planning and better decision making. And it's the only native Excel complete planning platform built for Microsoft 365 with Power BI embedded. With Vena, your financial and operational data is always connected, and your teams are always armed with insights and time to focus on what matters most. So when the stakes are high and the margin for error low, plan with agility, plan with resilience, plan with Vena so you can be prepared for whatever comes next. Visit venasolutions.com/planningaces to learn more about how Vena will help you plan for anything. Hello, we're speaking with Jim Young, CFO of Coalition. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Great to be here.
So Jim, as we always do, we ask our guests to begin by looking back for us and ask them to identify some of those experiences they feel prepared them to become a finance leader. What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, first sort of recognizing you never feel fully prepared, but those things that probably did the best. And the first one's really an ironic one, which is I'll never forget I was meeting with my soon-to-be mentor, the big Visa CFO, really well-respected CFO, very proud of my background. And he looked at it and he said, I would have never hired you had I been the person responsible for bringing you into the company. He sort of inherited me. And the reason why is prior to this big multi-billion dollar company, I'd spent 6 years at venture-backed startups. But I truly believe that prepared me incredibly well to be a CFO because the variety and speed at which you have to solve problems is pretty remarkable. And whether it's chart of accounts or raising money or filling the soda machine or procurement or business development, and that variety was really critical and helped me identify issues across a wide spectrum that takes you a lot of years to figure out. So I credit a lot. There are a couple of others, but that's one of the big ones for sure.
Now, when did that happen in your career? What was that, the first half or the second half?
Kind of right, probably at the first half. It was a really critical juncture because I'd gone from startups and I'd been a head of finance, but I really wanted to be a properly trained CFO. And I joined Visa, this world-class organization, for the process to go public. And was playing a variety of roles, but I got a chance to work for this really exceptional CFO that came in after me. And it really became I was going to mention the second big experience was my mentorship by him. And I feel like all leaders need a great mentor. I know I was incredibly lucky to get this mentorship, and I still get it to this day from this CFO.
You spent nearly 8 years at Visa. Wondering if, when you accepted the position, did you expect it to be a longer chapter than others, perhaps?
I hoped it would be, but I was sort of so intrigued by the process. It was going through this massive IPO. At the time, it was the largest IPO in US history and still maybe number two. And I didn't know what it would portend for me, but I got a chance to participate in a fascinating event and work for great people. So it's probably a lot longer than I anticipated, but really just one of my favorite experiences of my career.
You come to head, I think, corporate finance there, but can you give us a sense of where you originally step into the organization and what were some of the opportunities that came your way as that IPO became a reality? And
Yeah, this is it's kind of funny how careers play out, as I realized. Not always the best laid plans, but it worked out in hindsight. When I came in, I was kind of in a quasi corporate development role for one of the divisions of Visa at the time. It hadn't quite yet come together. And what was interesting was what I didn't appreciate was they were going to be bringing 6 or 7 organizations together, meaning 6 or 7 different finance teams. There would be redundancies, et cetera. And I was kind of a minister without portfolio because I was working on the restructuring and the eventual IPO. And in hindsight, I probably took a huge risk that I didn't know I was taking. But I was able to dive in squarely on this restructuring and the IPO. I ended up working side by side, late nights, weekends with the CFO, who eventually came in after me, take the company public. That opened a ton of doors because the transaction went well. So once I joined from there, I became my first job there was a divisional CFO of North America, our largest business. And then responsibilities expanded from there. And I got to oversee accounting and tax at one point, all of our CFOs around the world, over a product finance organization. So just got a ton of experiences, great mentor, great company, and learned just a tremendous amount.
just curious about your career because here you're in a large enterprise company. You talked about your those smaller companies you began with. You're sort of done a full circle. You're back in sort of that smaller entrepreneurial world today. Were you happy to return to your, more or less what your roots, or back to the smaller companies again?
Great question and very astute, Jack. That's spot on. It was very deliberate, which is I really loved the startup world that I experienced before. And at the same time, I really wanted to sort of get the training and get the bona fides as a public company CFO, which I eventually got to do. But at the end of my 6+ years as a public company CFO, I thought, all right, now I get to go do what I really want to do, which is go back to the high growth private world and get to help really build a company, hopefully give birth to a company as public, this time as CFO. So this was quite deliberate, but really wanted a company that was, and we'll get into this, but super, mission oriented and had a massive market opportunity. So this was quite deliberate. Hopefully the last thing I do in my career would be a great bookend.
Before we ask you about your CFO chapter at Coalition, want to just mention that you were CFO of Broadridge, which is not, how large a company was that? And you step into that, you leave Visa and accept an appointment there, I suppose. But what can you tell us about that chapter? And again, you were there 6 years, so you made an investment of years there as their CFO.
Yeah, this was ended up being a lot of fun. And by the way, no matter how much training you get, it's a little different day one when you step into the seat and suddenly you're the CFO of a public company. Your first earnings call is, in my case, was like 30 days into the job, which was a little uncomfortable. But and by the way, I was a relatively young CFO working with a very experienced 60 plus year old CEO. So you're kind of quickly put to the test of can you add value? But I adored it. It was a company that grew from about 4 to 5 billion market cap when I was there to when I left about a 16 or 17 billion dollar market cap. We joined the S&P 500 during that time and became, I think, even a bigger, stronger fintech leader. So I was really proud of the performance we had, and it's a really collegial, low ego team. So it was a really special experience.
Well, we might have a few more career related questions for you a little later, but right now, let's find out about Coalition. What is this company about? What does it do?
Well, first off, at the end of the day, we're a cybersecurity company, and our first and core offering is an active insurance product, and that's unusual, right? You don't hear active insurance, and that's because our mission, we wake up every day, is to protect the unprotected, and we begin with by marrying technology and a financial product, insurance. And so we are able to help small, medium-sized, and even larger enterprises protect themselves from the inevitability of security attacks on their infrastructure. And we are very powerful in doing that and help both on the mitigation as well as the risk transfer piece, which is so essential to just about every business in the world today. So phenomenal mission and technology that we bring to bear.
Can you tell us a little bit, maybe an abbreviated history of its capital structure?
Sure. I mean, this company has been a rock star from day one. It begins with our founder, Joshua Mata, who had quite a track record on his own, not only from being in intelligence agencies, but Goldman Sachs, but also a great cybersecurity company. That enabled him to build up quite a reputation. And so this company built up through some very well-known venture capitalists, so somewhat traditional capital raises, but with a really impressive group and large names, both starting with traditional VCs, later stage folks like a General Atlantic, Valor Equity being a big player throughout the company's history, and then eventually bringing in really important crossover investors like Durable and T. Rowe Price, and even big strategics like Allianz, one of the largest insurance companies in the world. So it's been very deliberate, very thoughtful in bringing together what I'd consider to be an awfully blue chip list of names.
So we know that you joined in July 2022, just last summer. Just wondering, you arrive, is there a reorganization for your team? Is there some adding some talent maybe to your team, adopting some technology? What is your list of priorities as you come through the door? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so exciting and also humbling to sort of jump into a group that had accomplished so much. And really, the way I thought about my job was, first off, what was I inheriting? And the reality is, this group, my finance group, did a remarkable job scaling a really young company. And when you go from zero to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue in a few years, there's nothing more complex for a finance team. And I think it's often, the unsung heroes of the organization, because it's really hard work to think through what the systems are, how do you scale it. But they did a really good job. My mandate was really then to think, okay, I've seen large public companies, and make sure that we start building towards that type of sophistication, those type of capabilities. And so it wasn't so much we have a problem with what we have. It was thinking through, what do we need to look like in 2 or 3 years as we're a $1 billion revenue company? We obviously already had a big $5 billion valuation. And so my thought process was all around what scale and what best in class looks like. And so it was less about upending big things, but I did need to bring in some talent in certain places that had that public company experience. As you know, private startup experience doesn't necessarily translate always into the skills that you need to be a large public company. And so my job is to sort of carefully bring those in, complementing what we have, but starting to behave more like a large scale, public company at some point.
We always like to talk about what we refer to as your lines of sight, and whether you had all the visibility you require to make certain the company's performing the way it should. We're wondering if you could just share with us. I imagine it's well. Let me ask for the top of mind metrics. What are you looking at as you arrive in the morning? What are those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, our core metrics are really measuring how much gross written premium. So that really measures the insurance products that we're selling and on behalf of many of our carrier partners, occasionally for our own balance sheet, but largely using the balance sheet of our carrier partners. And obviously, that's been growing tremendously. We care at the end of the day, and we're measured by our ability to have low loss ratios. And that's great for our policyholders, also great for our carriers that we work with. So those are two of the most important metrics, but also as a growth in business focused on the small and medium sized businesses. We also purely look at policy counts and making sure that we're growing. We're our goal is to be working with hundreds of thousands of small businesses, all of whom, by the way, need insurance. There's no business too small for this. Cyber claims can be, as much as $138 on average for a small business, which is pretty remarkable. So back to the metrics, really making sure that we're putting a lot of premium out there at low loss ratios, and then users using our software. That's what's so unique about our active platform is that we're enabling and giving people access to this best-in-class technology that no small business would ever be able to have. It helps them protect them better, which is good for the whole ecosystem. So I'm really focused on that user base and making sure that we're holding up our end of the bargain with low loss ratios.
Those users using the software, we would expect that you're collecting, trying to understand their behaviors. There's a lot of data, perhaps, that exists or you collect to understand better the opportunities that are out there via those customers and how they behave online and how they want to interact with the company. Is that the richest area of data for the company, or can you enlighten us?
Uh, Spot on, Jack. And that is, I think that's what's so interesting and why this is not your typical insurance company, because we very much look like a technology business. And it's analogous to search, where a search engine where, he who has the most users, the most data gets smarter because it's a virtuous circle and able to make the search performance better. Similarly, we are scanning the internet. We know just about every device in the world, are able to think about all the vulnerabilities. And as we add more customers, we get smarter about the threats. We know their infrastructure really well. And even, by the way, when we have a loss, we learn what our threat actors are doing, what these criminals are doing to gain access. So it makes us smarter. So our scale translates into a data advantage, just as you were highlighting. And so our ability to assimilate large amounts of data and then make that useful and practical for both protecting our customers, making us smart as underwriters, is absolutely the critical ingredient to our business.
As far as data and understanding that data, is that part of the finance team, a BI team? Is it a data insight team? Can you share with us how those insights are being gleaned and who's helping to do it?
Sure, it's remarkable. We have the company's made the right investment, so we have a data science team. They do nothing but making sure we're assembling these critical metrics. As a two-way street. We're obviously giving input. I'll come back to the finance part in a second. Input to what we need, and then they are expert at thinking about how to collect this, scale it, and make sure there's good integrity to it. That group actually sits in the engineering organization, so highly technical. But we in finance are huge users of all this data, and the metrics are legion. We talked about GPW policy going down by segment, size of revenue, type of industry they're in, very exposures they have, policy types. So we are huge consumers of this, and our job is actually to distill that and think through how that informs where we invest, how we invest, perhaps how we price. These are really critical. So it's a fascinating part of our job because it is big volume. We're insights, but it's not easy. You can't just take raw data and use that. You've got to really bring insight and thought to this.
Is there a particular metric or KPI or number that since your arrival you have sought to raise the profile of or share more widely or educate part of the organization about it so they understand it's a significant number that maybe they weren't paying as close attention to as they should? I don't know. Maybe there's a business dynamic that team that you just described, those different teams are able to identify. But is there something you've raised the profile of to educate the organization one way or the other?
Yeah, I think, well, first off, it's a very sophisticated organization. I've got a boss who's both a finance expert and a technology expert, so difficult to always come up with a blazing insight. But I will say, to me, it's about the synthesis of it, and so it's not one data metric, and it's even thinking about not just top line metrics, but working that into our balance sheet and thinking about things like return on equity and our use of capital. Because I think, as I subtly described, we have a few kind of business models in there, and so we have to be thoughtful about how we measure success in those areas, and therefore where we grow. That all eventually relates to valuation, and so I think bringing to bear what I would consider to be a composite metric, which has both of the kind of top line and bottom line, so and then combined with our capital. That's really a smart way to start appreciating and learning our business. And it's always sort of formulaic. You need to understand the multiple inputs. I think it's dangerous if you're sort of tracking, sort of one metric at the expense of others. And that's sort of my job, is to bring that picture together and understand the relative impact each has on what I think is the financial return for and profile for our company.
A company this size, do you believe the finance leader has greater influence or impact on talent at large? It seems such a critical human capital just seems so critical to the success of the company this size. Not that it's not to larger organizations, but certainly when you lose a valuable hire, it's more painful, perhaps. So we always like to ask finance leaders in companies of this size, what's their talent mindset? What concerns them? What are they excited about? What's successful?
Yeah. First off, it's interesting because talent to me is the most, I don't know, I think it's the fun part of the job. It's the hardest part, but it's the fun part of the job. And I don't just think about it for finance. I probably think, about the whole organization. I get to interact with all the groups. It's a fairly quantitative business. So I'm constantly evaluating what we have. We have remarkably talented people. And so my first thought is retention of our really good people. And retention is sort of, really critical. We can talk about attracting attention, but retention is, attracting talent, but that retention piece is incredible. And so recognizing who the hypos are and the high performers in high potentials in my organization and other organizations is what I sort of immediately do day one. Start maintaining that list, making sure I'm getting lots of exposure to those folks and from other organizations, making sure that I'm learning from them. They feel like they've got multiple connection points in the organization, always with an eye towards maybe they want a career in finance as well. Wouldn't be afraid to offer them as well. So I think that's really critical. And then I also think about myself as one of the people facing members of the team. I get lots of airtime and all the rest. So every interaction I have, I think about my ability to engage, encourage, speak truth to our teams. And so I think all leaders have to do that. But I realize I get a fair amount of time at the mic, and it's really incumbent upon me to think more broadly about my scope and specifically to people. That's what matters. And I think if I do my job well, I can help our other leaders sort of galvanize the talent part, which helps with retention and obviously recruitment.
Do you have visibility into those numbers? I mean, do you know what your net new hires might be, or churn, or these things that you see are able to see regularly?
Absolutely. I share a dashboard with our head of people and go through exactly that. And so we go through both not only sort of attrition, the types of attrition, whether it's voluntary, involuntary, our pipelines, where we're adding, how we're adding, whether we're winning in competitive situations or not. So I view this as about as critical to my job. It also helps me out also understand compensation levels. And I work, partner with our people team on equity levels and compensation levels, all the rest, making sure we're competitive. There's no more important ingredient to our success. I know it starts to sound cliche, but man, it's true. You just can't survive and thrive without the very best talent.
Excellent. Thank you for that. We're going to move to our signature question, which is our finance strategic moment question. We're wondering about During the course of your career, if there's a moment of strategic insight that you experienced as a finance executive that led you to maybe pursue an opportunity, to avoid a risk, whatever it may have been, what comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, there's probably more than one, and this one may surprise some, but it occurred on a stage in front of hundreds of people, and it became as a so it's a very public moment, but I maybe my thought process was private, so hopefully that was not visible to everybody. But I was at a large public company, one of the ones we mentioned, and speaking in front of the top few hundred leaders, and my job was at an offsite to communicate kind of important trends, a little bit of perspective on the investment community, and some aspects that are going on with our business. And I think at some point I realized that I was able to connect a dot between sort of how the investment community viewed us, meaning how we were valued as a company, and something very core to how we operate. For example, something around retention and sort of how we keep our customers and sort of the value proposition, and then the economic retention that we get as part of that. I got a lot of questions and suddenly a lot of engagement, just sort of that I could see in the audience. And what I realized afterwards was it's not because I had a brilliant insight. It was because I realized that my job was a lot about connecting dots. And it wasn't about just doing a great analysis on how we can create value in the business. It's not just about talking to investors and weaving a really good story. It's connecting those dots in a way that the average employee could understand that and translate that to his or her business and to our salespeople and all the rest. And then also for our finance team to understand, it gave more visibility, higher profile in urgency to something I was talking about. So what I realized is what a platform I had to drive change in an organization at a very specific metric. And even though it probably got nods and maybe some lip service, suddenly became something that was in focus and quite valuable as we created value. And I to this day, I take it as a lesson for how I need to do my job. And so it's not just sort of doing the particulars of any one particular of my job well. If I'm not connecting dots, I'm not doing my job. And I make my finance team more powerful and I make leaders better at what they do by helping them explain where we're driving value and connecting those all the way through to very tangible things, not sort of esoteric financial terms or consensus estimates, but actually what we can impact. And it comes back to what you asked earlier, which is thinking about those metrics that really drive value. And to me, that ends up being the blueprint for finance and really specifically financial planning and analysis. That's how we affect change and having that insight. Everything else is good, but insufficient if you're not connecting that dot, in my mind.
Hello and welcome to 60-Second Stories from CFO Thought Leader. John McCauley is undoubtedly the first finance leader to tell us his path to the CFO office began in a swimming pool. Back in high school, McCauley explains he was a rebellious student with less than impressive grades when a stubborn and no excuses water polo coach knocked him off his wayward track. According to McCauley, the coach's philosophy was rooted not so much in winning or losing, but whether the team had done everything in its power to succeed. For McCauley, this meant 3-hour practices before and after classes. 300 days a year. From those days on forward, CFO McCauley tells us he has championed the power of preparation. That story and much more on episode number 870 featuring CFO John McCauley of Calendly. Remember, the future of finance is listening.
We're going to move to our mentoring round where I ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We'd like you to think back to the first 60 days within which you held a CFO role. So the very first time you were a CFO, but the first 30 to 60 days, if you would go back and tell yourself something, what would it have been? So not here at Coalition, but way back when you first stepped into a CFO role for the first time, that first 30 or 60 days, what is the advice you'd give yourself?
I love this question because it's especially in my case, I'd moved cross country, brand new company. I had no reputation. I had a lot of questions swirling in my head, despite hopefully some type of confident exterior. But I think what I tell people and tell myself is, look, no one expects you to have all the answers. They really don't. And by the way, newsflash, your colleagues don't have all the answers either. So give yourself a break, be patient, and come back to thinking through the problem you're solving. And I think sometimes you get in these roles and you suddenly believe that someone's gifted you insight and wisdom. That's not the case. The case is you don't have all the answers, just like you didn't have them the day before. You don't have them the day they give you a CFO title. And I think that took a while because I think there's a level of insecurity sometimes you're dealing with. And by the way, that creates a lot of noise in your head. And once you realize that your job, the other advice I'd give myself is I'm at my best when I'm asking questions, not trying to opine or have the answer, but just starting asking questions, breaking down a problem, be curious. Those are the ways that you really, I think, start really adding value. And by the way, I also think you develop and engender respect because I think people realize you're coming to learn. And I think if you have a learning mentality, you're way more valuable to the organization. So I wish I'd known that. I probably could have been a lot more efficient and a lot calmer. I think the other piece that I probably heard, but I hadn't really internalized, so I would really hammer it home to this new CFO is your relationships with the rest of the leadership team are really critical. You know, your job is not simply to manage the finance function or develop a good relationship with the CEO. It's really to develop these deep partnerships with the business leaders and functional leaders around the company. And it sounds basic. It sounds obvious, but in no way is it. And I realized over time, and some of those relationships, by the way, took me years to develop. And some of it's earning credibility and to a point where you can give them valuable advice and help, et cetera. But you're really not, I think, doing your job effectively until you have those bridges and are problem solving together. Those are the things. And yes, I wish I could go back and tell my younger self to do those things. But sometimes it takes a little bit of experience and learning the hard way to do it.
So we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side. We're wondering if you have a personal habit or part of a daily routine that you're known for. This might be something you're known for out of work. It might be something a family member would point out to us. That's what Jim does. That's how he's always done it, or he's always done it that way. Don't know, but is there something that sets you apart, something that people point out?
Well, I suppose maybe unusual for a finance leader, which is I was a history major and I still love history. That's my joy. So I read a lot of history. Sometimes it's largely nonfiction, but also a lot of historical fiction. And so I probably end every day reading some type of history or historical fiction. And I don't know, it's on a lot of levels. It's calming for me. It puts things in perspective. I dare say I get learnings as I think about it. It makes me a better leader, but that's really how I end every day. And I couldn't think of a better way. It's what I look forward to at the end of the day.
Nice. Wondering if you have a book you'd like to recommend. Doesn't have to be a business book, just something that made a impact on you, influenced your thinking one way or another. Maybe it's something you escape with. Don't know. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I'm not a big business book reader, to be perfectly honest. But as I said, I do read a lot of history. My favorite author is Eric Larson, who's more of a historical fiction writer. And he has a book called The Splendid and the Vile, which is about Churchill. And it is, I find, one of the most inspiring leaders. And so if you ask me for any leader, and what I think about is, in addition to just learning and understanding, history and trends and things that happen, I think getting inspiration from great leaders is killer, because at the end of the day, there's the technical aspects of our job, but a lot of it's leadership. And clearly, I find, like a lot of people do, Winston Churchill, one of the most inspiring leaders through some of the most challenging times. So Splendid and the Vile, if you haven't read it, is one of my favorite books.
And Eric Larson, we haven't had it, so we're always excited to get a new selection. So thank you for that. And we are up to our final question, which is when we ask you to look forward finally, 12 months, just 12 months. We'd like to know what your CFO priorities are over that period. What would they be for the next 12 months?
Yeah, they're in a couple of buckets. One is scale. So I really want to demonstrate that we can scale as a finance function with a company that's growing quickly. And I want us to have the scale of processes and capabilities that a public company would have. That's one bucket. I think decision support. We have a fascinating quantitative, data-driven business, and we need an FP&A organization that is up to that task, and we've got the talent. So it's just making sure we grow into it as a group, and I give good, mentoring and leadership there. So I want us to be outstanding on that front. And then third, just sort of, I want to have a really good blueprint into our value creation approach. We know we create a ton of value. We've made shareholders very happy. We're not going to be a very, very valuable company, but I want to have a really intimate understanding of those levers and those narratives that create the most value, and making sure that we're adhering to that as we kind of map out our strategies and achieve our business plan.
Jim Young, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Jack, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.